Good morning, everyone, and officially welcome to How to Find the Best Fit, Factors to Consider when Selecting an LLM Program. We are recording today's presentation, and there will be an opportunity for questions, as I've said before. And so if you would like to use the Q&A or the chat function to send us questions, you can do that. You can also wait until the open Q&A period in the end. We anticipate about 20 minutes this morning to go through the substance of the topic, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. Let me start first by introducing myself, and then I'll turn it over to Julianne to introduce herself. My name is Olivera Jovanovic. I'm the director of the LLM and master's programs at the University of San Francisco. I have been with the University of San Francisco since 2019. And before that, I was at another law school managing LLM, master's, and SJD programs. In a prior life, I like to say, I was an attorney, and I am now in recovery, enjoying my time in higher education. But I mention that because professionally, I have been similarly situated to many of you. I finished law school in the US, and then I went to obtain my LLM degree. I specialized in taxation. And although I'm a US citizen, I did have to think about how to weigh the degree, the factors, the different programs, and determine which program was best for me and if the investment was overall a good decision. So I hope through that experience to impart on you some of the tools and tips that I learned personally and that I have used with other students in the past. Because our goal, you'll hear Julianne and I say this quite often, we would love to enroll you in the University of San Francisco if it is the right fit for you. We are looking for students who are a good fit for our program, and we're happy along this process to help guide you to what is a good fit for you. So we encourage communication, we encourage candid discussions, and we think that's the best way to build a strong class, both for ourselves and to help the right students find the right schools. So with that, I'll turn it over to the much more impressive Julianne Cartwright-Traylor to introduce herself.
Thank you, Olivera, and hello to all of you, and thank you for joining our webinar today. I am a political scientist by training, but I've had advanced training in international human rights law, both here in the US and abroad. I've been a consultant for the United Nations on human rights issues, as well as a visiting scholar at the International Peace Research Institute in Oslo, Norway, for 5 years working on international human rights issues. I've had leadership positions in non-governmental organizations like Amnesty International USA, Human Rights Advocates, the Women's Intercultural Network. And right now I'm also an official non-governmental organization representative to the United Nations Economic and Social Council working on human rights issues. I've been here at the law school since 2006 and working on the LLM program, working with our international visiting scholars, our international visiting students, our international exchange students. So like Olivera, I've been through the process of trying to select my graduate school when I completed my undergraduate studies in political science. So both of us will be using that experience to talk about, to give you some tips on factors to consider when selecting an LLM program.
Perfect. Thank you, Julianne. And before I turn it over to Julianne to start with the presentation, I want to just explain to you how we've set this up. We were thinking about a 3-step process that you could kind of take away with you and use when you're ready to start applying to LLM programs and as you get decisions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Julianne to talk about step 1.
So step 1, solidify your goals. And we give some examples here about learning. If you want to learn about the US legal system and improve your English, if you want to take a US bar exam, if you want to develop a specialization in US law, or work in the US long term. What we say is the first step in this process is to be clear about how the LLM degree fits into your specific long-term career goals. And let me give you a few examples. You might be an applicant with work experience already. And you want to look for an LLM program that allows you to specialize in your area of expertise that will lead to advancing your legal career at home. So such an applicant, the goals for students like these would be to take more specialized courses in a particular area, to network with professionals in that field, to participate in extracurricular activities focused around that area. And so we here at the USF School of Law, for example, partner with various law firms around the world. And so they send their support staff, they send, well, actually,
Associate attorneys,
they're associate
and
attorneys
senior partners too. But yes.
and senior partners to our law school. And they come here and they take advantage of our specialized courses, the network, both here at the law school and in the legal community here in Bay Area and statewide. They participate in extracurricular activities, and some of them have gone back. They've gone back to their law firms, and especially the associates and their junior partners have been promoted to senior positions in the law firm because of having been here in our LLM program. So let's say if you're an applicant who wants to stay here in the US and work, you will look for an LLM program that allows you the coursework to prepare for a bar exam, and that a program that has bar support services. These students focus on core bar subjects. They focus on working with career services, bar services, and they also take advantage of optional practical training and curricular practical training. We have all of these services here for our LLM students who want to remain here in the US. We have our academic and bar exam success programs that the LLMs participate in along with the JD students. And they actually do practice exams, and they have the full support of the ABES program. They have the full support of our Office of Career Services. Some of them also have done curricular practical training during their 9-month program here, where they've had placements in law firms, for example, to get that experience. And some of them have actually done optional practical training after they have received their LLM degree, and they've been able to stay in the US for another year, get a work permit, and actually get a position. So these are some of the tips that we say should be factored in step one to determine your goals. This is personal to you. It's based on your background, the legal market in your home countries. But we also say that it is essential that you go through the process of trying to determine what your goals are for getting an LLM degree.
Well said, Julian. Well said. Once you have your goals, I think the second step is to create a checklist of qualities or factors that are important to you and determine what your preference is for each of them. So before we go any further, let me give you some examples of the three categories or definitions of the three categories that I generally think exist as far as factors or checklists. So you have those that are personal. These are personal preference items for you, right? They don't necessarily impact the quality of your education. You're still going to get a quality education at all law schools. But these factors are more about how you like to live your life outside of the classroom, because we do recognize that the LLM experience is a holistic one. You are going to have your core education, you're going to have your extracurriculars, your networking, but there's also going to be a personal component. So these will kind of play into how you experience that whole year. The academic ones, these are related to the structure of the academic program, but again, not a direct impact on the quality of education. But I do bring them up because they're very different school to school. And we'll give some examples of each in just a moment. But the third category is professional. And these are items that are related to achieving your long-term goals. Again, not a direct relationship to the quality of the education you're getting inside the classroom or what you're going to learn, but certainly this one has a strong relationship to your long-term goals. So let's run through some examples. And as we do, let's remember that they are just that, they're examples. This list is not meant to be exhaustive. It's meant to be a starting point for you. You need to create something that is unique to you, and then included in each one is to determine what your preference is. But let's walk through it, and I think as we do, it might make a little more sense. So a personal factor, I think, is location. Some students are very set in a particular city, or they will rule out a smaller city for a larger city, or vice versa. They'll look for a college town university and not something in a larger metropolitan area. That's a personal preference for you. They do have some impacts on how you experience the program and what kind of program you can go to. But let's talk about location. There are big metropolitan areas, right? New York, San Francisco, Chicago. There are cities that are large cities, but very sprawled out. Los Angeles is a good example. Then you have suburban campuses that are not necessarily in the big cities, but they're adjacent to it. Then I'm just going to default, I'm sorry, to California because that's my example, but think of schools that are not maybe directly in San Francisco, but in the area surrounding it. Then you also have smaller college towns that some of the traditional big schools are in that are really kind of engulfed by the university, right? That's the main part of the town. They're all going to offer you a different experience. And you have to think about how you live your life and what you want each day to day, right? Larger cities are certainly more expensive. So I do have cost of housing and cost of living on there. But you want to think also about the opportunities that are available to you in each location for your networking or development if you're thinking about staying in the US long-term or looking for a job. So as you have that goal, if your goal, for example, is to stay and find a job, wherever kind of location you decide to choose, it might need to be one that has a lot of networking. So you might want to think about location in terms of networking, and you determine that your preference, I'm just going to make it up, is, for example, a large city, because there are more jobs in that legal industry there, or there's a bigger community there, or something like that. So that's how you should weigh these individual factors for yourself as you determine what they are. Another example is JD integration that I have under academic. Some programs, and I say this to students all the time, all LLM programs are structured very differently. Some programs include the LLM students, and I think this is probably the majority of them, but you need to ask each school, include the JD students in the LLM students in the JD classes. So you're integrated with the JD program. So that's what I mean by JD integration. Some schools have LLM only classes for some of their more popular courses for LLM students. That might be the case in both large and small schools, although it might tend to be more so in a large LLM program, they run LLM only courses. So how important is it to you that you're in the class with the JD students? It may not be important at all. It may be very important to you. And it might just depend, again, on what your long-term goals are. If you're wanting to stay, you might want to build more relationships with the JDs. If you are less concerned about being in the US long-term, this factor might not be important to you at all. So those are some examples. Finally, the professional one, I'll use again the distinction between those who want to stay in the US and those who want to go back to their home country. The career services might be much more important to you, or bar services, if your intent is to stay in the US long term, than it is if your intent is to get an education, specialize, and then go back home. So again, this is all personal preference. The factors that you come up with are going to be related to the goals we talked about in step 1. Your preferences for each of those factors is going to be, again, related to those goals. So it's a personal process, but let's talk about how you kind of find the information now that you've got those goals. The next step, you've got your goals, you've got your factors, you know your preferences. How do you find out where each school falls on each of those items? So I'll turn it back to Julianne.
So as we say, step 3 is research. How do you get information to weigh all of these factors that Olivera just spoke about? So one part is to do pre-application research, for example, through the Law School Admissions Council, LSAT org, or through the American Bar Association website. Another possibility is contact with admission professionals, contact with faculty, and alumni. So let's talk about each one of these things. With the LSAT, at the website lsat.org, each school has a profile. And so you can go in and you can read about the schools, including their specialties. So that's an excellent source in terms of doing your research. The next one is the American Bar Association website. The ABA website has a listing of all LLM programs by degree type. So if you've decided you want a degree in intellectual property, you can look at that. If you want a degree in environmental law or energy law, you can do that by looking on the ABA website and the LSAT website. Let's talk about admissions professionals. A lot of information on the factors and checklist items may or may not be on the posted publicly in the same way that other information is for each school. So what we recommend is that you reach out to the particular law schools that you're interested in and ask the admissions professionals the questions that you have. Now, Olivera mentioned course integration and the JD program. You probably should contact the admissions professionals at the schools that you're interested in, because it may or may not be on their website. And what you would do is to ask questions like, are you, as an LLM student, in classes with JD students? Or are you only in classes with other LLM students? A number of applicants say they want to be in classes with the JD students to share their information with them, to tell them about their situations, their legal background, and to hear about the background of the students. So this information may or may not be on the website. That's something that you can ask. And Olivera and I, as admissions professionals here at USF Law School, answer questions like that all of the time. Now, another source of information is with faculty. You can reach out to faculty members that you know at a particular law school that you want to apply to. You may have read an article by them. You may have even read a textbook that some of them have written, and you want to interact with them and find out answers to your questions. We do that as admissions professionals here at our law school. When we get prospective students or applicants, we offer to connect them with faculty here at the law school. Also, with alumni, we connect our applicants with alumni from home countries of our applicants, or in the same practice area that our applicants may be interested in. So the tip that I have in terms of talking about research is you can impress the academic professionals at the schools where you're applying by how much research you have done before you contact them, because this gives an initial good impression of you when you start to interact with the admissions professionals.
Absolutely. That is a wonderful point, Julianne. And all of this research, depending on what stage you're doing it, can also be helpful in writing your personal statement. It can be helpful in impressing upon the admissions committee that you've really thought about that university. You know, we know that students may be applying to more than one school. We all want to think that you're applying only to us. But when we get an admissions essay and they have the wrong school, those details, that attention to detail that you can show, if you can show, you know, specifically our school, or what is it about the school that you've researched that you like, that's always very helpful. And I think it's also helpful for your letters recommenders as well. But I am getting into different webinar topics, aren't I, Julianne? At this point, that's a nice little plug. We do have other webinars that Julianne and I have recorded on personal statements, letters of recommendation. We've spoken with both of our intellectual property and comparative law and international transactions faculty members as well. So if you're interested in any of those, please do reach out to us. But this is your time for questions. We went just about 21 minutes, 22 minutes, Julianne, so we're doing pretty good on time. So we have time for questions. Please feel free to type them in the chat. There's a Q&A function, or raise your hand. And while we're waiting, and I will say this, as you start interacting with admissions professionals, do ask questions. This is your time. And also in the US legal classroom, you'll be expected to interact and in some capacity, and your professors welcome it. So this is always good practice here. But I'll do a couple of things while we're waiting to see if anybody has questions. I'm going to drop in the chat, I'm going to include the link to make an appointment with Julianne and I. If you have any questions today that you feel like you're not ready to ask in front of other people or on a recording. And then I'm also, Julianne, going to throw out 2 questions that we commonly get on this topic, and you and I can tackle them. The first question I'll give to you, Julianne, is how does the application timing factor into this? So we're doing all this research, we're recommending this process, but what does this look like overall?
Okay, that as Olivera said, that's a question that we often get. And what we say is to start ahead of time, start long ahead of time. Some of our applicants start a year or 2 years in advance. But what we say is our applications are up online at least a year in advance, and for you to take a look at them and to start your preparation, because it is a long process in terms of you doing your research, in terms of you doing your applications. That's like 6 months to a year in terms of doing that work. Even though the program is only 9 months long, but those of you who are international, we recommend really starting a year in advance, doing your research, getting in contact with the schools that you plan to apply with, getting all of your application material together, not only the application and your transcripts, your personal statement, but also your letters of recommendation. And we caution the students to say that those may take a long time because your recommenders are very busy people, and you want to leave them enough time to write your letter of recommendation. So that's one point. Also, if we do admit you, then there is the visa process afterwards. And so you have to leave time for that. So what we say is just preparation, preparation, preparation ahead of time. The sooner you start the process, the better off you are. And interacting with us at our law school to help you through this process from you being a prospective student to being an applicant to hopefully being admitted and then actually getting you here to start our orientation week in August of each year.
Wonderful. So we have a couple of questions that have come in.
Oh, okay.
I want to just throw out one more thing before I get to the questions, and they are wonderful. So I'm really excited for the and want to say thank you to those that have included questions. But one thing I constantly get when we talk about this framework is how to factor the cost of the program, because obviously cost is a factor and it's a very important one. What I tell students to do is think about two things. I would not use this checklist or this framework to maybe until I have admission decisions coming down the pipeline. And I'll tell you why. The LLM programs vary program to program in almost every capacity, the tuition being one of those. There are some programs that I would say a realistic range is somewhere between $30,000 to $75,000 in tuition, and that's your cost to attend your classes. Most are probably right around the 50 to 60 mark. And that's US dollars per year, 50,000 US dollars per year. And that's where University of San Francisco lies. So I will use us as an example just because I don't want to speak to anyone else's costs. But that is the cost of your attendance in the courses. You do have other incidental costs, books, living expenses being another huge cost. But what I tell students to look at is merit scholarships, and scholarships in general are very different school to school. So I encourage you to apply to a school, even if you think that you may not be able to afford it, if they have a merit scholarship process. So for example, at the University of San Francisco, every applicant is automatically reviewed for a scholarship on admission. There's no extra paperwork or forms or anything that you need to do. So on average, our incoming class had a 50% scholarship last year. So that $50,000 has now come down to $25,000. So while San Francisco cost of living can be more expensive than other places, that significant scholarship may make San Francisco affordable for you. So I encourage students to consider costs, and then when you have, but apply nonetheless and see where you end up on the financials as part of this factors and checklist. But once you have admission decisions, I wouldn't rule out a school necessarily based on cost unless you know that they don't have any scholarships, and that's something you should ask about. With that, I want to turn to two questions. So the first question, Julianne, comes from someone about the referencing an alumni that they may have been in contact with in the application. So let's say they had spoken to an alumni, one of our wonderful alumni, and they want to reference that in the application. Where do you think is an appropriate place, if any, to include that?
Right. Well, there is a section on the application that asks where you heard about our LLM program. And we have a long list of categories in that. And one of them is alumni, either professor or alumni. And you're welcome to check that box. And actually, we have had, but because our alums are all over the world, and they're in various capacities, whether in law firms or at universities teaching or government service, that they have been some of our strongest recommenders, writing letters of recommendation for their students whom they've had in class or they have in their law firms. So that is where you would find on the application, you can check that. And then I've just been so pleasantly surprised when I have sat down to read an application And then at the end, and I'm looking at the forms and the recommenders on there, and I see one of our alums who is head, let's say, of the government agency in intellectual property, or is a senior partner in a law firm. So that's how you would be able to use alums.
Perfect. Wonderful. So we've got a couple more questions come in and someone has raised their hand. We have one person who has a bit of a specific question. I'm going to take it back and make it a little more general.
Okay.
And this person wants to know, is there a cutoff for grade point if their grades aren't necessarily the best? And do you want to talk, Julianne, about our holistic application review process?
Right. And when we say our holistic application review process, we look at the application as a whole, each part of what we call the application packet. The completed application, we look at letters of recommendation. We obviously look at your transcript. We look at your personal statement, for example. So we don't, when we look at the transcript, for example, we look at your grades and we see, let's say we had a person on the one of our webinars last week, and they talked about they had a problem their first year of their law school adjusting to the classes, being away from home and what have you. So as long as we see some kind of progression in those grades, which we usually do by the time they graduate, we don't penalize them because, oh, your first term at law school, you didn't get the best grades. We look at the whole application to make our decision whether or not to admit you and how much of a merit scholarship we're going to offer you.
Wonderful. All right, we have two more questions. I see that Kasun has raised their hand, so I'm going to allow them to talk and then welcome you to ask your questions. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself. Let's see, I can promote two panelists. Let's see if they're able to join us. Well, while we're waiting for Kasun, we have another question about our specialization in immigration law.
Okay.
And we don't have a specialization, but we have a clinic and some coursework if you'd like to talk about that, Julianne.
Right. So we're talking today about two of our LLM programs. We have one in international transactions and comparative law and one in intellectual property and technology law. The latter one is very specific to IP law, technology law, copyright law. But our LLM degree in international transactions and comparative law is a more general one. And within that, our students can focus in on issues such as immigration law, such as human rights law. So when we get questions like this and we talk with prospective candidates, we tell them that, and some of them then do apply for that international transactions and comparative law program with the goal of specializing in immigration law, specializing in human rights law. And in those categories, for example, we do have clinics for our students that they work with a professor, that work with clients, and they get additional experience while they are an LLM student. So that's how we handle the situation of our applicants being interested in specific issue areas like immigration law, human rights law, environmental law, and issue areas like that.
Wonderful. And that actually brings me to brings a good point to mind. When you are looking at schools, and I'm going to say this again, and I'm going to sound a bit repetitive, but amongst LLM programs, there is not a requirement regarding title of LLM programs and what you can actually study underneath it. So for example, our comparative law program is actually a program that allows you to study in any area of the law that we offer. So it could be immigration, it could be environment, it actually could also be intellectual property, taxation, corporate law. So one of the things that I encourage students to do is to use LSAC or the ABA, as Julian mentioned, as a starting point for your research, but you may find schools that have what we call concentrations within a general LLM program. So there is absolutely the opportunity to study in immigration law here. You will not find University of San Francisco listed as an immigration law LLM program on the ABA website. So it's for that reason that I highly recommend that you cross-reference those sources. And the LSAC website lists programs, lists the schools by their name and then their specialties underneath it, whereas the ABA website lists by topic area and then degree program. So the process for a prospective student, it does involve quite a bit of research and it can be a little bit overwhelming. And that's why we often encourage students to reach out to us, because they may not, we know the intricacies and the quirks of our system, but it's not easily identifiable from the outside. So that's why you should always use this as a resource.
And that's why we encourage prospective students to sign up for a one-on-one meeting with us so that we can answer their questions more in depth than we're able to do in these webinars. And we welcome that. And this is our role, to be here to work with you to see if our programs are a good fit for you, and if you think that you're a good fit for us to be here in our LLM programs.
And with that, Julian, I think we've answered all the questions and we are a bit over time. In the chat, I have dropped a couple of links, the appointment calendars, so that you can reach out to Julianne and I. I also included the link for our sign-up sheet if you want to get more information about future webinars, about other events that we're doing. And finally, I dropped the link to our LLM alumni playlist. We have 2-minute testimonials from a number of alumni through the years that you're welcome to watch and kind of get a sense of why different students chose our LLM program. Yes, that's included, but also what they were looking for in LLM programs and where they were coming from. And maybe that might help you determine what your personal goals are. So with that, we will say thank you to everyone for your time and for joining us early this morning. Julianne, any parting words?
We wish you well in your application process, and just do contact us with general questions that you might have and questions that you might have specifically about our LLM programs.
Yes, and which reminds me, I'll put the email masterlaw@usfca.edu. Oh,
Master Laws.
Master Laws. Always do that. In the chat, thank you, Master Laws. I will go have another cup of coffee and we will bid everyone farewell and best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.